Good evening. Look at me. I'll stand up for this part. Good evening. I'm Craig Arnold, president of the Kansas City Woodworkers Guild. I'd like to welcome you to another virtual meeting. This will probably be our last virtual meeting next month. I'm happy to say Mary May is our guest instructor for the week during the class, and she will be our presenter. In deference to her, we are limiting the number of people to come to next month's meeting to only 50 people, and we'll have you sign up on Sign Up Genius. I know it's not ideal, but it helps her because she does have some, her elderly mother-in-law is susceptible, and we don't want to do anything to make it difficult for her to go back home. So anyway, I'd like to welcome new members. We have a bunch of new members. I was reading the newsletter. Check your emails. You should get a link to go to the newsletter, Woodwards. But there's a slew of new members for the month. So we'd like to welcome all the new members. If you would, stand up at home and give yourself a round of applause. Let the applause die down. There we go. If you're not from the Kansas City area and you just happen upon us, say hi in the comments on YouTube Live. And if you'd like to become a member, we can certainly get you information on how to become a member if you're living in the Kansas City area. We're going to start first with Show and Tell, and we welcome the Show and Tell presenter, Jim Bainey. Come on up, Jim.
Am I on?
And he's going to do this through Zoom. We have a lot of our members at home.
Okay. So, Chris, who's the first one?
All right. Let's look here. Let's go ahead and start with Mike Jones. Mike, are you on Zoom? I don't think Mike's on Zoom. So let's go ahead and just read his.
Okay. So, Mike wrote on his sheet, here is Mike. Project for St. Andrew the Apostle Church in Gladstone. Columns turned by Anthony Harris. The structure is primarily walnut with Wenge accent trim, finished with Odie's oil. Took about 20 hours to build over the course of the 3 weeks. Started with a 2x4 rolling stand to build it on. Used double French cleats to hang it. It weighs about 60 pounds. I will send a couple of pictures of the project. We built it. Okay, so here's the final project. So have we got any indication the size of this? I don't think so.
There you can kind of see the size on.
Is it like 4 feet tall?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's about 4 feet tall.
4 feet tall, probably 3 feet wide.
Right.
And
he built that special stand to hold it on while he made it.
Okay, and so the columns were turned.
Yeah, they're half columns that Anthony Harris turned for him.
Did he just make one and cut it in half?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he used craft paper in between them. That way you just pop them apart real easily.
Okay.
But the thing was beautiful. I saw it when I was down here, and I was just like, wow, I was blown away. And the wenge, it's kind of hard to see in this because it is just an accent wood, but that wenge goes around the outside of the walnut. And being as dark as it is, that Odie's oil really highlights the grain of the walnut and the beauty of that wenge trim on there.
What's the back panel? Do you remember?
Back panel is, I believe, a piece of veneered walnut veneered plywood.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, it's a tremendous project. Mike, when he gets into one of these, well, it is absolutely phenomenal, the work that he can do. Very proud to have him as a member because of this kind of work. And this kind of work here will be lasting for centuries in these churches. So,
especially all the iconage that are in Catholic churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is that a statue or a photograph?
That's a painting.
Okay.
That is hung back there. And then the candles around the front. So he had to curve that and be able to accommodate those candles.
So the shelf that's underneath it that the candles are setting on, is that
Right, that's part of it too.
part of it too? Awesome. Okay. It,
Next,
well,
let's go ahead and go to Susan next.
okay.
So Susan Lawler.
Did I not print it off?
Oh, here we go.
There we go. Susan has made 2 boxes, and they are made out of cherry and walnut. She used shellac on one and Danish oil and wax on the other. Points of interest is the floating lid, cantilever slides, cantilevered lid, floating lid, and cantilevered lid. Okay. Splines in the corners to hold it together, and I can't tell, are they straight splines or are they dovetail or yeah. Okay. And an inlay on both. The project took her a couple of days. This one lid is 3 times. I made one lid 3 times because I knew that this messed it up on the router and messed it up on the dado saw, and learned about finish by trial and error. Need to take your class coming up, right?
Yes, he does. I was going to say that sounds familiar. Yeah, Cal says that sounds familiar. Trial and error on
Trial
finishing.
and error, yeah. It's called the swag factor. Scientific wild ass guess. Okay. So one is for her and one is a gift. Favorite part of the project was the look the shellac finish gave. After learning much about the rub out, she finally rubbed it out with, the final rub out was with pomace, which gives almost a French finish to it. Love to see that, just to feel the smoothness of the texture on the sides. Least favorite part is have to get better at applying shellac, which will make rubbing out easier in the future. I think shellac's pretty easy to put on because you especially if you cut it with non-wax
If you're using a wax-free shellac and you cut it with alcohol,
yeah.
make it very alcohol rich. The idea is many people don't use enough shellac on their brush.
Mm-hmm.
If you flow it on and flow it back, you can move it. If you don't have enough, your brush dries out as you move it
Really
across.
quickly. Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the problem is. People just don't put enough on their brush.
I started using shellac on white oak, or even all oak products, because number one, it doesn't raise the grain as much as other products do, and I use a lot of water-based urethane. And water-based urethane tends to lighten the color, and shellac, if you put shellac on first, it keeps that rich color
Right.
in it. Yeah. So
Nice looking boxes.
I always figure when you're doing shellac, if you feel it being sticky, you're damaging the finish. When I started doing shellac, when you start to feel that your brush is dragging, you have to think you're damaging the finish, you're not helping it. So you have to get off of that if it's dragging.
That's a good point.
Next is Wayne, and he's on Zoom.
Wayne is on Zoom. Hi, Wayne.
hi, Wayne. Tell us about this.
My daughter wanted a Kamiko panel, and so I gave her a bunch of choices, and of course, the pattern she came up with is the one that I had been doing forever. So instead of something new, it's a whole bunch of repetition of stuff that I had already done. So, but it turned out pretty nice. So,
I have a quick question on that. How many pieces are in that, Wayne?
they're about 350. So
It looks like there's more than that.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, it's the largest one that I've tried.
So what's the size of that whole project?
It's about, 9 by 14, something like that. No, maybe 10 by 16.
And you've got it in a frame?
Yeah, I put it in a frame. It's just press fit into a oak frame that I ebonized with iron, the iron tannin reaction, and then shellacked and waxed that. The back of it is just painted Baltic birch plywood set into the frame, and then the frame was made exactly to size for the panel, so the panels just press fit in there.
So this is a wall hanging, is that
Yeah, it's just to hang on the wall.
okay? So what was your favorite part of this?
Being done. I enjoy doing the Kamiko. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of putsy work, and I like putsy work, so.
Okay, so I can't see it blowing up, but at the middle of all those center hubs, are your pieces tapered to meet?
Yeah.
How did you taper them?
You just use Kamiko jigs, which are,
No, I'm talking about, are they tapered?
Yes.
yes,
Okay, so how did you taper them?
with jigs like this and chisel. So they're done at 22 and a half or 45 and all that. So it's just 90, 22 and a half, 45, and that's really all all you need. So 67 and a half.
Okay,
The platform sits for the chisel to ride, the back of the chisel right across, and it will shear that wood at each particular angle that it needs. So you
Okay.
have a different platform for each angle. And it's like a ramp block.
Almost a shooting board type arrangement.
okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about teaching a class on this?
Well, we did about 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
Missed that one, Jim.
yeah, that's one I missed, I guess. You gonna teach another one?
Yeah, I think we talked about doing it again, so I don't know when.
Have you got any plans to do any more of that? More of this?
Yeah, I've been playing with different designs. So
Have you thought about incorporating that in a piece of furniture?
yeah, that when Mike Pekovich was here, he made this cabinet, and that's where I got introduced to the Kamiko. A small wall hanging cabinet that had a panel about one. It was like 3 squares, 2 or 3 squares. So much smaller, but it was incorporated as kind of a window into it.
So, where the pieces meet, are they glued together?
Just with a dab of glue, yes.
Okay, what kind of glue did you use?
You can put the whole panel. You can put the whole panel together without any glue, and it'll stay together very well.
Oh, really?
But yeah, because it's all. If it doesn't stay together, you're not getting it tight enough.
So you don't want to drop it.
Yeah, but I did put glue in for longevity.
Okay.
Used on this one, I think I used Titebond, but white. I started using white glue because it dries a little clearer. So.
Awesome. So, how long did this take you?
The panel itself I worked on, for about a week and a half, off and on. I'd do an hour here, an hour there, that type of thing.
Did you
So
finish?
it's
Did you finish it with anything?
No, it's just basswood, and it is no finish. If you try to put any finish on it, with all those tight corners, it's just, you know, you can't really,
Okay.
it's pretty difficult, so.
Awesome. Very good.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wayne.
I admire your persistence and patience. Okay. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Wayne.
Any questions, guys?
Yep.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Wayne.
See you next month, Wayne.
Awesome as usual.
Thanks.
Yeah, for a Minnesota Swede, you aren't too bad. Yeah, sure. Okay, who's next?
Let's go with Tom. Tom, you on Zoom?
There's Tom.
Let me. Hold on. Trying to get just Tom up here.
I don't have that one. Oh,
Whoop, that's not what I want. Speaker view.
I think
Tom, you there?
Tom,
Tom, is your microphone muted? We're not hearing you.
Microphone's not muted.
Oh, there we go.
Lips are moving.
Okay.
So he can hear you, but he's talking, but we can't hear him.
Okay. Tom, are you on?
there you go. Hold on. Let me.
The wonders of technology.
So, Chris, bring up.
Hold on just a second. We're going to go. I got it now. We're going to go.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
So we've got
having an issue with
Tom's.
Tom's microphone, so we'll go, or speaker, so we're going to go ahead and go to his video real quick.
Okay.
So we've got Tom's video.
There.
There we go.
Oh, hold on.
1965, and this is my reproduction. I got all the dimensions off the pictures as best I could. The black and white photos are of the original.
I've got you guys muted right now.
I've made mine reproduction out of cherry, which will get darker as it ages. The original was made out of mahogany. The Townsend family was credited for coming up with the shells on the top of the blocked sections as a way to terminate that, whereas before they would have went straight up and the top would have been shaped as well. And there are some that think that John Townsend was one of the first to do that. And the shells differ slightly inside the medallion, and this concave one would have a scroll on the outside on later shells. This is an early chest for him, for John Townsend, and I followed that pretty much. I did do some of the construction methods differently than they did the original, but the outside, everything looks as close as I could get to what I could see on the pictures. And there's the top. And then we go to the back. Oh, we got the side view of the dovetails and the shells, then the back, and then a close-up of the writing that I put on the back, so we know where it came from. And then I also carved underneath, on the bottom, the date and my name. There we go.
All righty. Tom, that is absolutely fabulous work, and Cal is chomping at the bit over here. So here you go, Cal.
So first of all, congratulations. These block fronts are like iconic in the period furniture world. So I'm a little jealous that you beat me to it because I have these on my bucket list. So they're awesome. How did you do your block fronts? I've seen a whole lot of different ways to achieve those. How'd you do those?
We're still not.
Yeah, I could ask like 30 questions, but hey, maybe I'll have to call Tom and talk it through it. Yeah, we're not able to hear you, Tom.
Okay. Sorry. It
Feel
looks
your
great.
frustration, Tom.
It looks great.
Yeah, amazing job.
So this project took approximately 4 months. Yeah, we were just informed that you're retired, so nice time. The project is destination for your own home. What a piece! Wow. Favorite part was making the project. The least favorite part was the finish, and you used shellac. Yeah, mostly shellac on. I wonder how many coats are on that. Cal, you got any comments that you want to make? More comments about this?
It's
Yeah,
just amazing,
wow.
he says.
The craftsmanship is superb.
I love the little squirrel down at the bottom of the bracket foot there. That is just a touch. I mean, you don't see that kind of stuff all the time. And your Cal has something else.
I'd also say that you took the hard way out because cherry's a heck of a lot harder to get all that carving that good than mahogany. So, extra points for that.
Any other questions? Are you seeing any questions online, Chris? I don't have YouTube pulled up.
Hearing.
You know,
People were just saying they're having troubles hearing with the Zoom, so I'm going to make some adjustments during the general meeting, guys. So
Okay.
we get it on YouTube. I'm going to see if I can't get that worked out.
I wonder if we can't get Tom to make a presentation of this.
Oh, I'm sure we can.
This is a program. This piece alone is just amazing, and it's worth the
Yep.
yeah,
The deep
really.
dive. Yep.
So see if we can't
Yeah,
maybe
we'll
do that
go
in the
from that.
in the future.
Maybe July, August. I'm not sure what Matt has coming up for programs, but yeah, this would be just absolutely phenomenal.
Okay.
Let's move on if we can.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate your hard work. It looks great.
The next one is Keenan Oren.
Kanan, are you on Zoom? I don't think he is.
I don't think Keenan's on there, so you have his notes. There's Keenan right there. Do we have a page on Keenan?
No, we don't.
Wait.
In the email.
It's, all right, what's this one? Nope. That's an email. That's from Mark Crawley.
Here it is.
Oh, there it is.
Here it is.
Okay.
Sorry, got too many papers in front of me. This project is a weaver's counter, and the materials used is cherry, maple, rosewood, Douglas fir, and brass. The finish on it is shellac and wax. Points of interest is a pull-out work shelf, and graduated drawers. And the tiger maple veneer, I take it on the front of the drawers from what I can see on the distant. You need binoculars.
Oh, here, I can scroll through, sorry. Oh.
The challenges encountered, aside from dimensioning the lumber, all the work was done by hand without electricity. First time veneering, using hammer veneer method to varying degrees of success. Construction was complex, hard to attach top with so little space to maneuver around a work shelf webbing. The project took approximately 150 hours. It will be used for, and final destination is an article in Popular Woodworking. Favorite part of the project are all hand tools, the use of all hand tools. Gosh, that's dedication. Wow. Least favorite part, not using electric tool, no. Least favorite part of the project is designing and making the brass fasteners that would fit in the 3/4 inch space between the top and the work shelf runners. I'd love to see that project because the
Yeah, here's some photos now scrolling through.
Sorry, I was getting the Zoom, the audio figured out real quick here.
that project would, I'd love to
tapering
see that project in here so we could take a really hard, close look at it. It looks like just a,
See, look at
Ex-
how he's. This is what I think is interesting. That's an ancient technique for holding wood, your workpiece to your workbench, is using a hand screw and that hold fast. Not many people know that you can do things like that. We have a whole rack full of hand screws over here.
so he took a bracing bit, drilled the holes, and then squared the mortises for the tendons. Wow.
And that's the tongue and groove plane.
Yeah, for the bottom of the drawers.
Mm-hmm.
And the slide out shelf. Yeah, that would. I'm really disappointed we can't have that sitting right here where we can take a really hard look at the craftsmanship of this piece.
Maybe we can have him in here the month that the article comes out in Pop Woodworking.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll autograph your copy too, I'm sure.
That's what I need is another woodworking magazine.
Yeah.
Okay. Is this the
Great job,
last one
Keenan.
coming?
Nope.
Oh, okay. You
So,
want to go first?
Yeah, I can go. Well, my wife cleans houses, lots of houses, and one of her clients said, "Oh, your husband does woodworking. Can he fix a chair?" And so, sure, she can fix a chair. Well, she brought this chair, which I guess is like one of a set of 8 of these without arms. And I asked her through the test, I said, "What's wrong with it?" She says, "Well, there's a crack in the seat." Well, when it got to me, the crack was about an inch wide all the way back. So I had to glue that. But the thing that really kind of stymied me was that somebody had done some repair work on this in the past using epoxy to glue some of the rungs in. And one of the rungs was broken. So I had this article from years ago from Woodsmith magazine on making these chair clamps. I'm going to put this right here. And so I made these clamps. This one here I've gotten set up in the spreading position, and so I can just set that in there. It's a 1/2 inch all thread, put a wing nut on an end, and then the nut on there. But here, hold this for a second. But the neat thing about this is I can pull this off, and you know, like most of these knobs, you have to thread all the way up. This one I can just slide the piece off. when I want to reverse it. Then I can put my washer back on. And then when I bring this down, it just automatically locks on, so it will tighten up again. I saw these. They're not cheap. They're about $9 a piece for these things from McMaster Car is where I got them. No, not at Woodcraft. Sorry, not at Woodcraft. And I just saw these and I thought, oh, these are great. So at least 18 a piece at Woodcraft, yeah. So when I glued this up, this came in handy because I could get these things hooked on here, and I just used some of that sticky rubber tape that sticks to itself kind of as a way to grip this, and that way I can just tighten these things down and it's not going to damage the wood because it's a wood clamp on wood and the little rubber wrap on there. So they came in handy gluing this up. There's a couple of the rungs were glued in with epoxy, so I didn't want to try to break them loose, but some of the original ones were I could break it loose with acetic acid, just white vinegar, and that broke the PVA glue bond. And then I was able to re-glue it, and I had to put another rung in the other side. So these clamps came in handy for that. But that's my show and tell for the month.
2 months.
2 months, yeah. I had this last month too. So now I can take the chair home and finish it.
So you're going to refinish this?
No, I just have to color this one rung because
Okay.
she's got
Oh, I see.
seven other chairs that look just like this, and I don't want to make it look any different than the other seven.
So 7 out of the 8 you needed to repair?
Yeah, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
Apparently somebody leaned back in it. And I should show you on the bottom of this. So the cracks on here, that crack went all the way through. I repaired with butterflies, and I wrote seat repair and put my name and the date on it. But I almost felt like saying, "Do not lean back in this chair." That's the warning and the limit to my warranty.
Okay. Very good. Anybody got any questions?
Do you have something to show?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. I had to scratch my head what to get my wife for her birthday, and I just built a brand new deck, and she was intent on putting her pots of herbs and spice out on my new deck floor, and I said, I'll fix that. So I made her this tree, and I don't know if you can get a close-up of that shows the scroll saw work that I did on the, probably not. The bottom has got it's a figure of a flower that's on all 4 of the legs and then all 8 of the holders for the pots. And now she can walk right out the back door of onto the deck and doesn't even have to lean over to look and see how her plants are doing. And I had to make this difficult. I went and tapered that post. So I made it out of 4 pieces, 45, mitered all 8 corners and tapered it. And making that thing is about 6 feet tall, and making a post that way and then gluing it up, and I had to check my sanity for doing that afterward. And then I put a what do you call those pieces at the top?
Finial?
Finial at the top, and I just went to Home Depot and found a part of a screw-on leg and cut it off and put it on. She thinks it's great, so there we go.
That's what counts.
That's what counts. It holds 8 pots, and she's had a bunch of her friends over, and they said, "I want one of those." And so line up, put your name on the list, and I'll think about it in 10 years.
Take deposits.
Yeah, I made it out of cypress. I'd never really worked with cypress before, and one of the first things I figured out was cypress is really hard on saw blades. So I don't know if I'd do any more of that or not. So just because it's a costly, when you got a forest saw blade and you run 4 boards through it and you got to send it back to forest for you get it tuned up again. That was pretty expensive.
Would cedar work in something like this, you think?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And Cal has a question.
What was your decision making as far as making that out of 4 pieces? Couldn't you have done a solid post? Save yourself a little bit of work.
I have to. I don't know what I was thinking. I got to make this difficult. Was my
Okay, I thought you found 1 inch 4/4 cypress and didn't have any big material. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt.
No, actually, the only 4x4 post that I could find was treated, and because I couldn't find any cedar any place, every place is just out, and so I really didn't want, and it is all knotty, and I couldn't find a straight one any place. I went to Lowe's and they had like 3 left, and they all looked like pretzels. So I just went over to Metro and got some cypress, and which was relatively inexpensive, but it's costly when you got to send your saw blades back.
Are you planning to? Is it finished, or are you just going to let it weather?
I finished it with I put a coat of shellac on it. I literally slathered it in shellac to keep that kind of a brown color, because then I finished it with water-based urethane, and water-based urethane tends to bleach out or stay whiter, and I didn't want that white color, so I've started using a lot of shellac before I spray it.
So is this outside, or
Yeah, it's outside. Okay. It's on the deck. So
awesome. Thanks.
Sure. We're done? Question?
I think we're done. You have a question? Anyone
Chuck.
online have a question?
Chuck says that Jim, if you need some magazines, we can get them in the library.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Chuck says if you need magazines, we have them in the library.
Okay.
You don't have to subscribe. You can come here and read them.
Okay.
All right. So that concludes. I'm sorry?
That was bald cypress?
No, the wood.
Cypress? Bald cypress?
Bald cypress or just cypress?
I didn't know there was a difference.
Yeah, there's bald cypress is like the ornamental tree, but this is cypress.
Yeah,
probably
well, it's straight and it's clear, so
Yeah. So it just billed as cypress at the lumber stores.
I
like
noticed
at
it
Metro.
cracks out real easy. Cypress isn't.
Yeah, it does check.
Yeah,
It's
there was a-
kind of oily too.
Yeah, I in fact, there's a couple of pieces I had to glue back together after I had them cut out, and they just came apart. So.
Yeah. Often on woods like that, we recommend at Woodcraft to wipe down with acetone, the glue joint, and when the acetone flashes away, apply your glue and then clamp it up. And that way it'll take a while for that oil, wood oil, to come back to the surface and affect that glue joint.
I did put a pretty good job when I mitered those corners. That post is 12 or 6 feet high, and the bottom is 4 inches, and the top is about 2 3/4 inches. And so I made a jig on the table saw, and
That's a pretty good taper over that length.
it really is. That was a challenge. My joints turned out really well. They were tight, and I was pretty pleased.
Good. How'd you clamp it up?
The Bessie 4-inch clamps, C clamps, not with the right handle on them.
The F clamps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I own 20 of those. So, and I clamped up one side at a time, and I put a a glue block right at the heel of the taper, and at the bevel, and then it tightened up real well.
Nice.
I don't know if I'd do that again.
All right. Yeah, again.
Again. All right,
All right.
I'm done.
Well, thanks, Jim. All righty. Jim Bainey, everyone. Thank you. Great show and tell. There's some really cool projects. I think Wayne, every time I see this, I'm just so impressed by the Kamiko that Wayne does. And he's so humble and precise about it. Humble about his talent and precise about his work. He's really good. But, you know, when you look at stuff like Tom made and what Keenan made, I mean, we've got some real talent in this guild. And I know I watched Keenan in here for I don't know how many weeks work on that table. And he just comes in and just plugs away at it. And, you know, if there was a question, he'd ask a question. If I didn't know the answer, one of the other shop foremen and one of the other members were able to help him out. And we did not know that all of this was going into an article for Popular Woodworking magazine. So it's kind of exciting to see that our members are really getting out there. I know Kevin Thomas, he writes a lot for different magazines and blogs. So we get some real talent in here. So. Yeah, that would be a good one. Maybe we can ask Keenan that and Kevin. That might be a good newsletter article, or just come down here. I know Kevin's going to start a blog, and maybe that'll be one of the topics that he can cover in that. So, great. All right, so moving on here, we're going to go into the announcements and reports. As president of the Guild, I get the honor to tell you and we're going to go on your honor here, if you've been vaccinated, have both your vaccinations, it's been at least 2 weeks since you've had your second vaccination, you do not have to wear a mask in the shop for COVID. You should wear a mask in the shop for dust, but for COVID, you don't need to wear a mask. If you have not had your shots yet, if you don't feel like you need to get your shots, if you are some way vulnerable in another way, please wear your mask. That way, any other member who's not been vaccinated, they won't be infecting each other. We just ask, this is on your honor. If you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear your mask in the shop anymore. It's a good idea that if you're approaching somebody that is wearing a mask, put a mask on. It's not going to kill you for that 2 or 3 minutes you're talking with them to wear a mask. You can take it off as soon as you walk away. Respect each other. Just know that there's people that have lives that are beyond the walls of this guild. Like when Mary May comes, I know I think she lives with her mother-in-law who's in her 90s. She's a susceptible woman. We don't want to give Mary May anything to take back. That's why for the June meeting, we're only allowing 50 members to come, and you must sign up through the Sign Up Genius. We'll get that posted and emailed out here in the next day or two, but you must sign up through that. If you didn't sign up through it, we're going to turn you away. I know there's some people that can't understand that, but we're going to turn you away. And we're going to ask that if you're working with Mary, please wear a mask. I know in her class that's going on for that whole week, the benches will be further apart, but she may ask for the safety of her family to wear a mask. So enough of that. Let's see. If you haven't, read Woodwards. There's some great articles in here. One of the things that I thought was pretty neat is the number of sponsors. If you look at the sponsors throughout, our list of sponsors is growing in here, and that is really cool. I'm very happy for that. Also, one of the articles that gets me going is the Santa's Workshop. We're going to try this again for November. This year it'll be November 20th and 21st, Saturday and Sunday here at the Guild and with the Turner's Club. Santa will be here so that you can bring the youngsters in your life, children or grandchildren. They can make a little toy truck with Santa, and then we'll have a lot of the members will have tables set up to sell their own ware. So it's a great jump on Christmas gifts for the woodworking lover in your life. And then I read this article that Jim Barrett had put out on the age of wood, talking about the different uses of wood throughout history. And that's an article in the newsletter. So that's all I've got for this month. Cal, do you have anything you want to add? All right. And I know Mike McCauley is taking care of ailing family. We wish them well. But Tim Locke is our member at large with the election results, and here he is on Zoom.
Go. All right.
Tim.
Hello. The board of the
Hello.
Kansas City Woodworkers Guild met to allow for electronic ballots this year again, to elect the board members and the leadership committee directors. The guild had a nominating committee that advertised in the newsletter and email notices that the nominating committee was accepting nominations for the guild board and the guild leadership directors positions. The electronic ballot measure received more than the required quorum of votes, so thank you for voting. And the quorum was required by the guild bylaws. The board members elected Gary Melke and Mike McCauley to the board, and the board appointed guild officers Gary Melke to serve as treasurer and Mike McCauley to serve as secretary. In addition, there were candidates for guild leadership committee directors, and they were Chuck Saunders as assets director, Chris McCauley as events director, Matt Nowak, program director, and Dwayne Miller as sponsorship director. Each term is for 2 years. Other board and director positions are elected on odd years. The guild wants to say thank you to the board members and the leadership directors for volunteering their time and effort for managing the guild activities. We hope in the near future to allow more in-person activities and even general meetings of the members in person. Also, if you're interested in contributing time or leadership to the guild's continuing operation, please contact any leadership committee member or board member. The guild website also has contacts for getting a hold of those leadership directors, either myself or any other board member or any leadership member. Each leadership director wants contributing assistance, and these positions start outside of the election process. So they could start tomorrow or next summer or whenever you think you might want to offer your services. Again, thank you for those who have served. Back to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, Tim. And he's running back to get us turned over. Thanks, Tim. See you in a couple weeks. Alrighty, so we're going to speed through the rest of this here. Gary Melke, his article in the newsletter, just once we did sign a new 3-year lease starting June 1st, 2021, lasting for 3 years. Our tax return for 2020 has been filed, so we're up on top of that. And we're actually in good financial shape, even though the guild was closed and limited for a lot of the time last year. This year we're starting off good, so we'll be fine. You can also check any of the financials are listed online in the members only section, and there are also copies placed in the library as well. The books are in the bottom shelf over on the far right hand side, and you'll see the bylaws, you'll see the meeting minutes, and also the financials for each month. So in an effort of full transparency, there they all are. Let's see, Ron Hall with Communications wants to remind us to check out the Facebook page. We have facebook.com/KCWWG, and also the Guild's Instagram is Kansas City Woodworkers Guild. You can place photos up there of your projects, ask questions, get some feedback on what's going on in your woodworking life. Also, we have a Twitter account that is at KCW Guild. There's also YouTube. Don't forget, if you're watching us now, you're on YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you'll get a notice every time that we go live with these meetings. Ron Hall is our communications director. He he asked us if you do want to write an article for the newsletter, he would be thrilled to have you write something. I think this is the first month in several that I have actually been on time with my newsletter article. So I know Ron says Ripley wouldn't believe it. Craig's got his article in on time. So Mark Crawley maintains our website and does a fabulous job at that. Don Steele sets up the library and gets it running smoothly. Many of our members, even long-term members, don't know that you can actually check out books from the library and take them home. Check out DVDs, take them home and read them. When you're done with them, we ask that you bring them back, please. Let's see. Got events. Chris, Santa's Workshop. Anything else you need to add to that?
No, just the article. Once we get closer, I'll start getting more information.
Yeah, once we start next month, we'll have a lot more information about how, if you make things that you want to sell, you can get a table down here at the Guild, and as the kids are making the trucks, you can sell your stuff. I hopefully will have a table down here where I can sell some of my goods. So Jim Berard has membership at 785 members. Woohoo! So Matt Novak has, I know he's got next month lined up with Mary May as the speaker. I'm not sure about July and August who he's got, but he's been talking with a few people to get those lined up. Safety Committee and Safety Director Mike Jones. I think there is an article in here. I didn't get clear to the back of this one tonight. And also Dwayne Miller from Sponsorship wants to remind us to, when we go to Amazon, use your smile.amazon.com, choose the Kansas City Woodworkers Guild as your charity, and 0.5% of your purchase price will come back to the Guild as a donation from Amazon. It does not raise your price at all, but I think in the last few months I've contributed a few dollars to the kitty on that. In training, Norm Carpenter's our training director. If you do want to see a class or a demonstration, Norm would be the one to contact on that. But on May 22nd, there's a marking gauge class. Finishing class on May 24th. It's a 3-day finishing class, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, taught by me. There's beginning marquetry, which is, I think, David Roth. One session's on June 4th. There's another one on June 7th. Decorative wood carving with Mary May. I think there's a couple of seats left in that. If you go to the website under training, click on that, and the price is there. It's not a cheap class, but it's not the most expensive class we've ever had, but you will learn carving in that class. Also, basic woodworking starts on June 24th for 10 weeks. So then in the carving, or in the SIGs, the special interest group, the SIGs, Woodcarver SIG meets on the 4th Tuesday of the month. They meet over here in classroom number 2, the hand tool room. And so the next one will be May 24th. The CNC SIG is meeting on the 4th Wednesday of the month, so that would be May 26th. Hand tool SIG resumes on the 4th Sunday of the month from 2 to 4 p.m. And so the next one's May 23rd. The Power Tool Restoration SIG meets the first Sunday of the month from 3 to 5, and that next one will be on June 6th. And the Scroll Saw SIG meets on the second Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. over in classroom number 2. So that next meeting for them will be on June 9th. Our next meeting will be June 16th. We will send out an email for how you may sign up through Sign Up Genius to be one of the 50 people that can come and be part of our studio audience. And I'm also happy to announce, too, that the raffle will be returning in June. So bring your dollars and your 20s and your 10s so you can buy raffle tickets. And Megan's over here, yes! So, all righty. So moving on to the program for tonight. Andy Krum is a member of the Guild, and his brother has gotten us. I'm going to turn this sheet here so I can make sure I say this right here. His brother Eric collects a lot of the wood, but was responsible for the Guild getting that big batch of Australian wood. And for those of you who came in and got some of that wood, I've already got some of that wood picked out for me that I've bought for knife handles. Just absolutely phenomenal wood. And I know that there's probably some of these flute makers and instrument makers, you're going to cut that wood up and make a knife handle out of it. So, all the woods that were found came from trees in Australia. And so Eric is the vice president of the International Wood Collectors Society, and there's people all over the world that collect this wood, and we're fortunate to know Eric, a new friend of the guild. So Eric, if you're there, you want to start with your program, he's going to take over here.
It'll take about 40 minutes. Anybody who has questions, feel free and chime in. I've asked Mark Pete, the fellow wood collector, to answer questions, mostly because he's forgotten more than I know. I'm a computer guy and a retired Army officer, so I can shoot people and blow up computers, but I know a lot about wood, but not nearly as much as Mark. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. All right, can you see a kind of greenish colored wood, says wood identification on the top of it?
Yeah, you're up.
All right, good. And I'm not going to walk through all this, but this is kind of an outline. The intent is I'll leave the slides with Matt, and you guys can go ahead and view it anytime in the future if you want to get up on wood identification. There's a lot of different items, and I'll walk through each of these individually. So there's a lot of information. This is about wood identification. Keep in mind, most books are about tree, shrub, vine identification. And this isn't really that you don't have the flower or the leaf available, you got a piece of wood. So key thing is there's a lot of photos. If you do have a chance to see the tree and take a picture of it, makes identification of the wood a lot easier. But that usually doesn't happen. And I got into this because I was making things out of wood, and people would come in as soon as they found out that I'm collecting wood. And I've got well over 1,000 species. They come in and say, here's a piece of wood. What is it? Well, 90% of the time it's a light brown with annual rings in it, and they all look alike. But I'm going to show you some ways of trying to identify that piece of wood. If it's one of those common species that looks just like elm, ash, etc. So one way is, of course, is to take pictures of the wood. I collect pictures. I'm up to about 3,000 different species with a photo of a sample of the wood. It makes identification a lot easier when I sort them by color and going down the line. There is a DNA breakdown available. It's kind of new. Unfortunately, it'll identify the species, but there's always a but with this stuff. It is so complicated that A, it's very expensive. B, you end up having to get almost a sample from almost every forest in the world because a specific pine growing in one continent versus another continent, the DNA is quite a bit different. A lot of them are luminescent and fluorescent, and I'll kind of walk through a little of that later. And again, chemical analysis is becoming more popular, but I'm not really going to address that here. And then tree and wood key species, I'll kind of address that in a little more detail. So the key thing is finding out where the wood came from inside the log, whether it's radial, transverse. It really makes a difference when you're looking at the wood to understand where it came from. And as woodworkers, of course, you really care about where it came from, that piece of wood that you're going to use, because how it expands and contracts makes a big difference of where it came from in the log. So we all like grain patterns. I think most people like the quarter sawn and 1 second from the left. But it depends really on how you take that log and slice it up, and it ends up with the kind of grain that you want. So when you talk to somebody and say, I want rift sawn because I want to try to get as much straight grain as possible without all the rays showing up as they do in quarter sawn, or as most people do, you get live sawn, but that's really kind of a crapshoot because live sawn, you end up with a lot of warpage because you got the grain patterns that goes from up and down on the ends and then goes flat in the middle. But again, it's kind of key on where the wood comes from and what kind of grain pattern you end up with. And for those of us that are turners, I like doing flat items, but I love turning. And that's how I kind of got into the wood collecting. And where you cut it, that piece of wood, from how it showed up in the log is how you end up with different grain patterns, as it's seen on the right side. Regardless if it's a plate or a bowl, you'll end up with a different grain pattern based upon where that came from out of the log. So wood characteristics. So all trees have bark, have sapwood inside that, and then a heartwood. The heartwood versus the sapwood will change. And what is heartwood? Heartwood is former sapwood that actually goes through a chemical process and changes, in many cases, significantly in the way of color and the structure of the inside of the cells. Thickness of the sapwood, that can vary. Some trees have sapwood that's literally an eighth of an inch thick. And then like maple, I think everybody's familiar with, the heartwood is actually very, very small inside and very unstable. And the sapwood is really the rest of the tree. So with maple, or in that whole family, the heartwood is actually considered a defect and you only buy the sapwood, whereas trees like walnut, where it's dark wood, having the sapwood is considered a defect. So, and then the wooden density of the piece of wood, again, it can differ significantly, and I'll talk about that a little more. Hardness is kind of related to the density, but there's a Janka test where they take a ball bearing and drive it halfway through or into a piece of wood, and it's the amount of pounds per square inch of force that took to drive that ball halfway in that determines the hardness. So it's both the cell structure and the density of that structure that usually determines the hardness. And then of course is the old dry and wet. Obviously, if you're building flat items, wet's not good. If you're turning items, wet is good and it makes it a lot easier, but then it takes longer because you got to set that roughed out item aside and let it dry. And usually it warps and changes as it dries. So most people, if you've turned or made sawdust out of walnut, you can taste and smell that sawdust. And so a lot of woods, rosewoods, they're called rosewoods because they smell like a flat rose flower when you cut them. So again, there's a lot of different odors and tastes that can kind of tell you what kind of wood it is that you're playing with. Fluorescence, if you have a black light, there aren't that many trees that show fluorescent or pieces of wood. Sumac is one of them that's a light green, and it actually has a really strong fluorescence if you put a black light on it. So again, it just helps identify that it is, sumac. Now, most information that you get from a piece of wood is really from the end grain. And I'll walk through some of the differences. So the color, because the color can change, but the end grain for most trees doesn't change. And most species, you can look at the end grain and kind of get a really good idea what the species is. Another one is where did the wood come from? I currently used to live in Kansas, but now I live in Maryland. And we're kind of cursed here because we're in the northern edge of most southern woods and we're on the southern edge of most northern woods. So we have a lot of different species that grow here. But in most places in North America, the species that are limited in a local area. So if you know where it comes from, you can narrow it down. So size of the piece of wood, when you look at the rings that show the annual growth, it kind of indicates the size of the tree. You know, some trees get really big, some trees don't get very big. So again, that helps identify the tree. And then of course, knowing how old the piece of wood is because of oxidation, rust, and yes, wood's rust, just like metal. They change color chemically, also change on the surface as they're exposed to air and sunlight. So knowing how old it is also helps identify it. And again, I'll kind of cover that in a little more detail. A lot of colleges and state agriculture departments and forestry departments have actually created wood identifications in their area. So this is just an example of one out of the University of Maine. And what it actually is, you walk through the questions and you say, you know, yes, no to each question, and you move on to the next one. And by the time you've answered all the questions, you should end up saying it's this species of wood. So where it says under hardwood species is the ring porous, not ring porous. I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. I have to admit, I did not look to see if there was one in Missouri or in Kansas for the trees that grow locally there. But it's worth taking a minute. I mean, because the keys are usually kind of nice. They were originally developed in World War II, and most of them were built for overseas woods to help the Army, Marines, or whoever was in the area trying to identify the trees because they didn't have a lot of expertise. So anyway, worth going through them if you've got them. And this is just an example. So again, it's kind of a logic of how you walk through yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, as you walk through and down. And then you can finally end up by the time, like I said, answering all the questions, you should be able to say, here it is. So it's worth, and it makes life a lot easier if you can find one that's local. So one of the biggest challenges is when somebody brings in a piece of wood and says identified, you got to ask, did you just cut it or has it been around a while? And that's because woods really do change when they're exposed to air. I don't know if anybody's familiar with a wood called pink ivory. It's pink. Unfortunately, like most redwoods or pink woods, it turns brown. So when it's exposed to the sunlight and ultraviolet light, it turns a light brown. And I have some boxes that are brown on the outside, and because they haven't been exposed to the UV or minimal oxygen, you open them up and they're still pink on the inside. So it really makes a difference how you know the wood and if it changes. And I'll give you some examples in a second. So somebody mentioned earlier cherry. Cherry is the perfect example. It really changes fast when it's in the sunlight. If you get a new table and you put it down and you got a vase or a mat that's in the middle of it and it gets sunlight part of the day, within 3 or 4 weeks, you move that mat or vase and all of a sudden you got this really light spot. And it's easy to fix because you just move it over, expose that lighter area to sunlight and it'll darken too. Mahogany is the same way. Popular, which grows a lot in here in Maryland, it also changes, and for the better. I think it gets prettier. Purple heart is another good example. Everybody says, oh, you know, give my girlfriend a purple this or purple that because she likes purple. Well, the problem is there are 27 species of wood sold underneath the name Purple Heart, 3 of which stay purple, the others turn brown. Now, they won't turn brown instantly. It takes a while. But after 9 months, it gets a little darker. And usually about 3 or 4 years later, it kind of gets to a medium brown. So again, knowing the age of the wood helps identify it because of the color changes that can occur. So out in Kansas, one of the key woods, in fact, the tree that was planted more in the United States than any other tree is Osage orange. And that's because before the invention of barbed wire, it was your best way to keep control cattle. It's famous for changing from a bright yellow, orangish color to a nice medium brown. But if you've designed your item for the yellow color, you're going to be very severely disappointed years later when it turns. Same with Sapodilla. It's in that piece on the bottom left. It's barely pink. That's because this wood was sitting around on a shelf for a long time. When it initially is cut, it's pink. And then it slowly, from the outside going in, it slowly changes to brown. It takes a while, but it happens. So I'm only going to discuss hardwoods. That's because, well, there are some pines that are used, but most of us work with hardwoods. So, and if you're a turner, it's almost exclusively hardwoods because softwoods have a tendency, pines have a tendency to do a lot of tear out as you're turning them. So I'm only going to discuss hardwoods here. So cell structure is different between hardwood and softwood, even though there are some softwoods that are actually harder than some hardwoods. But the governing is based upon the species, and that's some species have significantly different cell structures than others, and I kind of walk through that. But here's the key identification. Somebody brings up a piece of light colored, dark colored wood to you and says, "What is it?" And you look at it and kind of hum and haw, get your little lens out or a magnifying glass and look at the end grain. Most of the information to identify species is based upon the end grain. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about water. Obviously, trees have a lot of water sap in them. They're in the cell walls, which normally after you've cut it, it kind of gains and loses water out of the cell walls. Those cells themselves can have sap or water in them. And then the protoplasmic contents of the cell also can have, again, sap and water in them. So the water can occur in the first two forms, and there we go, back again. In heartwood, water occurs in the first two forms, and so that's because it goes through a chemical change. And again, the cell walls, if you take a piece of wood from outdoors and you dry it, as the bottom line says, it's usually, or at least here in Maryland, it's about 12%. And then you bring it into the shop and let it sit for a week, and it'll go down 8, 9, 10%. And then you work it. Well, you take it somewhere else, outdoors, indoors, and it will, through the year, as the moisture content in the air goes up and down seasonally, the wood will continue to absorb and dry out as the air humidity changes, which is, again, part of the reasons that wood glue lines have problems, because the wood is contracting or expanding throughout the year. So it's worth knowing what kind of wood it is and how it stores water. Specific gravity. Interesting thing about this is, and it's the 39 degrees, and you look down at the fourth bullet, it's 4 degrees centigrade. 4 degrees centigrade is 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you look at the weight of the wood and whether or not it's equal to water, so the water is at 62 pounds per cubic foot. If the wood is heavier than that and you put it in the water, wet or dry, it'll sink. If it's lighter than that, it'll float. Most woods in North America do float, and that's because they're less than 62 pounds per cubic foot of wood. But there are a lot of exotic woods that do sink. And again, understanding the density and the weight of the wood and whether or not it floats helps identify it. So obviously it's cells in the wood. As you can see on the right side from the magnification, a black walnut, You've got the vessels which go up and down from the trunk to the branches, and that's where the sap and water runs up and down the tree. And then you've got rays, which are those white lines, and usually think of it as transfer of sap and water from the bark into the pith and through the cells that make up the tree. So rays go in and out, vessels go up and down. So, and together they make up the annual rings, and I'll kind of walk through that in a little more in another slide. So the water as it moves, and most people think, well, if you want to cut a tree down, you cut it down in the winter. Well, that usually doesn't make any difference. The amount of sap or water in a tree is usually consistent. The difference is in the spring, as the leaves start branching out, the volume of the water moving up and down the tree does increase, but the actual volume of water in the tree is usually pretty consistent. But it's the changing of water moving up and down the tree and the sap content that changes from spring to winter. So there are three primary classes of cells. They're called ring porous, diffuse porous, and semi-ring porous, and I'll walk through each of those and give you an example. So as you can see on the right, the cells have a lot of fiber around them. And again, that determines that amount of fiber usually determines the density of the tree and how much cell material is in there without being affected by water. So pores, trachoids are elongated cells. And again, that's where your water and sap moves up and down. So as I mentioned earlier about annual rings. So if you look at the picture on the right, you can see a light brown line, and that's usually the winter time. If it's a for a seasonal area for the trees to grow, because it's still growing, but it grows really slow because there's no leaves on most trees. And as a result, the growth is really slow and dense. And then when the spring comes along, leaves are blooming, coming out, flowers are coming out, and the growth speeds up. And you've got the cells that then are providing the moisture movement and sap movement up and down the tree. And it's usually, again, more intense in the spring. So as it slows down its growth and getting cooler in the fall, and as the leaves start dropping, you get the denser growth and usually the smaller cells because it's not as much sap and water moving up and down the tree. And then again, you hit the winter and where there's really slow growth. So woods like ash that have a lot of large cells in them in the springtime makes it for a weaker wood. Makes it easy to identify, but it makes for a weaker wood because the density of the cells is a lot of air and the density of the cells isn't that great. So woods that are slower growing in the spring, denser woods are usually stronger. And again, you'll notice a lot of woods that are in the Midwest there, hickory, elm, mulberry, fall into this category. Let's see, I covered everything. All right. So diffuse porous. Basically, if you see in the picture on the right, the cells are pretty much going through the entire wood, and that's usually because it's in a warm climate. So there really isn't a summer or a winter. It's kind of warm, same temperature all year round. And so the Aphzela grows either in Africa or in the Asia, in the islands, and again, usually a tropical climate. So semi-ring porous have clear where you can see the pores going throughout the year. And again, these are all usually where it's a mild winter, mild fall, Pretty much the temperatures do change through the year, but not that great. So, and these are usually stronger woods too, because again, you've got more cells or more fiber between the pores. So as you're looking at the end grain, you look at the pores that are easy to identify. And as you saw a minute ago, cells can be singular, they can be double, they can be multiples, clusters, rows, as I'll show you in a second, bands. But if you look at the pore size and how they're structured, it really tells you a lot of information and helps identify the species a lot easier. Because again, a lot of species, common commercial species, the way their clusters and rows of pores helps identify them fairly easy. So here's a good example. Australian eucalyptus blue gum. Again, it's in arid growth, so as a result, you don't really see the annual rings that strong, and the pores as going through. But interesting enough, all the pores are separate. There's not dual pores, triple pores. So usually it's called, solidarity when they're showing where there's not that many rows or double pores. Again, it's fairly unique. So between the no annual rings or less clearly identified and single pores throughout the year, it tells you tropical or arid climate. And it tells you that, well, in this case, it's blue gum because of the way the pores are structured. So pores do come in multiples. Sometimes, as you can see again in Jatoba here, a lot of the pores are doubles, but you also see some triples. So again, the percentage, the numbers, and the way they look, and whether or not they're structured vertically, excuse me, again, it helps you identify the wood. So another one where you've got clusters, so you can see the pores, and again, the early wood for the year, as it grows, there's a lot of sap moving, so there's a lot of pores. And again, these make for a weaker wood, but again, you can see there's not that many species, but they're like 1, 2, 3, 4 right in a row, and they're called clusters. And coffee tree, this is out of Kentucky, so it's a southern wood, but it grows pretty much up and down the East Coast, but mostly in Kentucky, North Carolina. So the seeds were used as a coffee substitute. Really pretty wood. So again, here's another example of one tree that's fairly strong, but it's got pores. And again, it's because it's a relatively tropical tree. And you can see where the pores are almost always in clusters and usually in a chain up and down. Again, helps make it very easy to identify the wood. And here's another one. Again, another eucalyptus, but you can see where the cells move right and down again as a cluster, but instead of going up and down, they kind of go tangentially across the wood pores. So. Another one that's kind of interesting, red elm, and most of the elms are this way, and that is they kind of go in a row and kind of go up and down in a little pattern. Again, this is one of the reasons elm is kind of a fairly strong wood, and that's because it's got early growth, but it's usually pretty fast. It gets over, and then you've got the majority of the summer and fall and late spring in the center growth area with a lot of fiber in it, so it's usually a fairly strong wood. So if you see this pattern in North America, it's usually a member of the elm species. So pores can be filled with resin, gum, sap, and when the tree is cut and dried, a lot of those gums and saps reside still in the tree and in the cells that they were in, and it shows up as a solid cell. So something's there. So again, depending upon what it is in the way of species, for those that don't know panga panga, it's related to Wenge. It's a cousin, and so it looks like Wenge, but it's a much more dense grain pattern and turns really, really nice. Just not as popular because it's heavier, and so they don't ship as much of it. But panga panga, if you're a wood turner and you want the Wenge look, but you want something denser, it's really nice wood. So trellises. The best example is if red oak rots really fast. If you put it outside, if you take about 6 inches of red oak and you can actually stick it in water and drink out of it like a straw. Whereas white oak, when you pick up a board of white oak versus a piece of red oak you just picked up, it's almost twice as heavy. And that's because telloses are inside it and they actually add a lot of weight because it's like a little plastic ball in the veins. And so it doesn't allow water to go up and down those cells. And that's why white oak is pretty nice for outdoor furniture for that reason. And that is the trellises stop water from moving up and down the cells, adds weight, adds stiffness to the wood, and stops the water from moving up and down. So they're kind of nice to have. And again, it helps identify it because you can see it when you cut the wood and you view the end grain, the cells aren't hollow. They've got something in them. But it's not like it's a solid pattern where it's solid white like a resin or a gum. It's got the fibers in it that broke off as you cut it. So there's a list of resources here. The Hobbit House is a gentleman who, Paul Hines, collects pictures of woods. He tried to emphasize commercial woods, but he has a lot of examples of end grain. And he identifies usually where the wood came from. And really nice to be able to go in and identify wood, relatively easy. And then if you, wood database, Eric Myers, again, he has a mostly commercial species, although he's been expanding in the last year to slightly less known or not quite commercial woods, but woods that you can usually find available to purchase. And he does walk through, and it's worth noting, the wood database tells you will it hold nails, screws, glue, okay or not. So it's worth knowing what wood you're working or turning, because it makes it easier to know how to glue it or not, or how to turn it. Some woods turn really well, some woods splinter or chip. And again, these guys can give you that information. If you're really getting into the end grain and you really want to identify a species, the University of North Carolina, you can Google Inside Wood or use the URL here. It's got the largest collection of end grains available in North America. So if you've got a wood and you think this is what it is and you look at it, you can usually go to the University of North Carolina, type in the common name or the botanical name and come up with an end grain picture. And they've got literally thousands of species in their database. And that can help you identify whether or not it is that species.
Now, Eric, on that,
Go ahead.
it's just the botanical name. They don't recognize common names anymore.
Okay.
For the University of
I see.
North Carolina site,
Right.
but they will list common names after you've put in the botanical name. So it's an awesome site.
Speaking of botanical names and common names, the Hobbit House has a database that to me is the best there is out there. You can type in a common name and you can actually, it'll list you a botanical name or multiple species botanical names that have that common name. Usually if a wood becomes popular, Purple Heart, well, everybody says, oh, it's purple, so I guess we'll sell it as Purple Heart. So these guys will give you, again, Paul Hines' database is really worth downloading and using if you're trying to figure out a name. If somebody sells you a piece of wood and it's got written on it, Panga Panga, type it in and it'll come up with the botanical name. Then you can research out and find out what kind of wood it is and how it works. USDA Forest Products Laboratory, they will identify up to 2 species a year. Now, their website last year went to 2 species. This year, when I looked at it a week ago, is back to 3. So either way, it used to be 2, might be back to 3 species that they'll identify for free. If you want the wood back, you have to give them a self-addressed envelope and shipping crate. Otherwise, they keep the wood. But they're pretty good. They usually don't get down to the actual species. They'll give you the genus, which then, makes it relatively easy to identify the species from that. They do have a lot of tech sheets on wood that goes into great detail on the species, its characteristics, where it grows. And then there's the International Wood Collectors Society. It's worth noting that they've also got a lot of tech sheets. They've got a lot of history, over 70 years of providing information on species. And it's really a really good source of information. And if you're really into wood, it's worth joining. So, any questions? Is everybody still awake?
Yeah, we're all still awake and great presentation. I don't have any questions on YouTube yet. If anyone on YouTube has any questions, please feel free to ask.
So let me give you one last resource. It's been printed twice. The newer one's a little better than the older one, but either version is still good. And it's called Identifying Wood, Accurate Results with Simple Tools. Bruce Hoadley, if I pronounce his last name right, is really a good source of information. And if you ever get a chance to get a copy of the book, it's worth getting. So since I have a few minutes left, did anybody want to see some of the odds and ends that I have produced?
Sure.
Matt asked me to put this up. All right, let me go ahead and stop sharing this one. I got into collecting wood when we had kids. I was in the Army at the time. As I mentioned, kind of retired Army. When we had kids, back then, you didn't make any money in the Army. And when we had kids, we needed furniture, beds, chairs, etc. And so if I could afford it, I didn't want my kids using it because it was a piece of junk. And if I couldn't afford it, well, so I started making furniture. That's how I got into woodworking. And then we traveled all over the world. So I got into using local woods in different colors, etc. So slowly but surely, I started collecting wood. I have 2 ways that I show my collection. This on the left side is my kitchen, and that's my wife's collection. She gets dibs on anything I make. So she gets to look at it and says, yes, this is mine, and here you can have this one back. Anyway, And then on the right, I'm up to 524 different species. And so there's the current rack. Slowly but surely, I'm kind of slowing down on making bottle stoppers. And the way I got into bottle stoppers, I should mention, is that about 15 years ago, I made a set of 2 for every family member. And I got all of a sudden all these requests after they got them for Christmas to make more or make gifts for other people. So I slowly said, hey, I'll go ahead and make my collection into bottle stoppers. So the other way I make bottle stoppers is, or wood collection, is actually making a small, I try to do it by 3-inch high, 3-inch diameter lidded box. Needless to say, after making a couple of hundred of these boxes, I now have teach a class on making boxes and bottle stoppers, obviously. Um, but it's just a way of showing all the different colors and species and helping identify woods. It's just a lot of fun. I have a couple hundred made already, but I've got over 900 species set aside where I've got a cube sitting on a shelf ready to go. So I'm slowing down on the bottle stoppers and getting back up on the boxes. So trying to clean some of the shelves off. But you would be surprised at colors of woods. Same thing. Have a sister who had a craft show for her club every year, and so I had made a desk set, staple puller, tape dispenser, stapler, for everybody in the family, again for Christmas. And she said, oh, can you make some more? So I made a few more. She sold them at a craft show. And so the next year came along, and I said, heck, I'll just take what species I have in hand and with enough wood, and I'll go ahead and make some. So I made, or cut, I should say, a little over 50 different species, and then I moved. As a result, those species and pre-cut wood had been sitting in plastic containers in different houses and different shelves for about 15 years. So my New Year's resolution this year was to clean those plastic containers out and make them. So I got about 54. I've got about, I think, 5 staplers left to make, and then all letter openers to all of them. It's fun to make good
You know, in
gifts.
November, there's going to be a sale here at the Guild that you might want to send some of those to.
I'm coming out in 6 weeks to visit the mother and brother again. So yeah, I might do that. Anyway, I usually don't sell the stuff, so but I have too many to give away. But just look at the diversity of colors, and I mean, it just like I said, wood's a lot of fun. I think I'm
Most of
preaching
these
to the
are-
choir on that.
Most of these are urethane, Derek.
Yeah, they're polyurethane. I make my own little mix of polyurethane and wax. And then you name it, I've made it. On the left, the chair there, the first chair I made for my daughter, she destroyed before she was 2. It was really pretty, but it was kind of fragile. So I made the mistake of saying, well, I think she was 3 at that time, and you can design your own chair. So she went through and said, I want this one, and this one, as you know, she looked at the species on the shelf, and so it resulted in this chair. She's 36 now and has a kid of her own, and he used it when he was growing up. So this one held up and it's still going strong. Dining room table in the middle, small table on the right. So again, just useful. This is how I got into making different things out of wood. The one on the left, my wife designed that. She thought if I'm collecting wood, I might as well get it off the shelf. So she designed it. Obviously, I made it. Again, there's a whole bunch of different species, just kind of pretty, the headboard. And below that is the matching prototype for the right side of the end tables I made for my daughter's bed. And then that's the headboard for it. That one's out of walnut. And anyway, um, different woods on the left. And that was it.
Now,
That's
Eric,
phenomenal work.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's a lot of years of collecting. It shows there. So
I was
now, is yours one of the bigger collections around, or are there people that you look up to and say, "Wow, one day I want to be like him"?
Mark, who is on the dial here, he's up to a couple thousand. I think I'm up to about 1,500 different species. Andrea's wood, or her father's Felix's wood collection, added about 60 new species. So it's slowly getting bigger.
Wow.
I think Bugbee had 6,500 in his collection, and Wilson had 10,300 in his.
My wife would say, "Okay, you got to build something you can live in because you're not bringing that stuff in the house."
And I think that happened for a couple of them.
I figure I have to live to about 250 to use what I have now.
Wow.
Because the problem is the bottle stoppers are, it's a small piece, and the lid box is the second piece, and then the rest of whatever that log was goes on the shelf. So
Now, do you offer your services for research if people need to come in and look at your stuff?
that's how I got into this. Was when people found out that I collected wood, everybody would come up and say, "What's this?" I still have people drive over to the house, even with the pandemic here, saying, "Here's 3 pieces of wood. Can you help identify it?" So yes, I use the samples of wood or the bottle stoppers to help identify them.
Yeah, because I use the wood database at the store quite frequently. Somebody brings something in, I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's turn on the wood database here and look at it. And I was, when you were showing the end grain, I'm like, yep, that's how I've identified some of the wood. It's just through their end grain. I've got a little loop magnifier that I can look at the wood and look at their pictures, so it works out pretty well.
Yeah, and the loops are like $5 or $6. They're really cheap, but they're really handy to have. So.
Yeah, I bought a 40 power with LED light in it. And
Oh, well.
the batteries went dead, and the damn batteries were more expensive than the loop.
It's fun, and it does help people out because it is important to understand what wood you're working and the characteristics of it. It really helps you make your product better.
Oh, yeah.
I'll add a couple things there on your end grain. A lot of those pictures that you saw were either meticulously cut with a razor knife, or they were fine sanded up to like 1,200 or so grit. And so it's not like you can just take your chop saw and cut off the wood and look at the end, because you're going to have all kind of torn fibers. So you need to have a clean cut for comparison reasons. And if you're going to sand it, typically the best way to do that is in your wood vise. You put a sacrificial piece of wood on each side of it, so that you don't tear out the ends. And oftentimes I use a piece of soft wood on each side, especially if I have a hardwood in the center. And if you have the pleasure of having a festool with a vacuum on the end to suck the sawdust out, that's great. If you don't, you want to blow it off every once in a while. Otherwise, you'll actually pound some of your fine sawdust into those pores, and then you'll trick yourself in thinking that you have gums or tyloses when in fact you just have sawdust packed in there. And then the other thing is, you want to make sure that your sandpaper is clean, not old sandpaper, because what you can end up doing is burnishing the wood. And when you burnish the wood, if you have like sugars in there, like if you have maple that was cut in the spring of the year, there'll be sugars in there and they'll caramelize, and that throws off the optics for color. Especially a lot of people forget to look at the structure and they get sucked into the color. And I mean, Eric can attest to it as well. People give you a piece of wood that's stained and they forget to tell you that they stained it. So you automatically are thinking, well, this looks like, when in reality, it's not at all. So just remember when you prepare your end grain that you either have to use a razor blade, or fine sand it through multiple layers of different grits.
That's good advice. Thank you. Chris, do we have any questions from the audience? All righty. Well, thank you both for being here. And we'll look forward to seeing you here in a few weeks. Hopefully you can stick around and come back down to the guild. Have Andy bring you back down.
It's fun, even though you sold all the wood.
Yeah. Oh, golly. So with that, make sure that Chris gets both of your addresses. We always give a little parting gift for our guest speakers that come and join us. So if you want to message Chris your mailing addresses, we'll get you a little goodie out.
Just give it to Andy and I'll pick it up.
Oh, okay. I can do that. So
if he doesn't keep it.
All right. Yeah. So with that, thank you very much for coming in and stopping by the Guild for this meeting. Again, I'll reiterate, for the June meeting, we will be sending out an email. The seats are going to be first come, first serve. You must sign up through the Sign Up Genius, and it'll be for 50 people. The people that are enrolled in our class will be, if they want to stick around, I know they'll be here for the entire day for carving, but some of them may want to stick around. They don't have to worry. They're grandfathered into attending the class. But you'll get to see some of the carving that the class is doing throughout the day. They've already had, 3 days by the time the meeting comes around. So they ought to be damn good carvers by the time Wednesday rolls around. So with that, thank you very much. The next meeting is June 16th. It's a Wednesday. Sign Up Genius for the first 50 people. And Mary May, world-renowned carver, will be here. So thank you very much, and we'll see you at the Guild. Stay safe.